He is the founder and editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, which has been hailed as the BBC of the book world. He's been covering the book business since 2000, first as an editor for Publishers Weekly and then as a columnist for Bloomberg. He serves on Frankfurt's International Advisory Board and frequently lectures at home and abroad. Please join me in welcoming Edward to the stage.
Okay, so I'm going to be straight up. I'm a journalist. I am not a consultant. I am not a publisher. I am not an author. So I'm going to give you an overview from very much from my perspective, okay? It's a subjective perspective. I hope that you'll feel free to ask me questions, challenge anything. It's a bit of a rapid-fire overview around the world from the point of view of an interested individual who is curious about what you do and how that connects to the people around the globe. What you're going to find is you have a lot more in common with them than you might think. Title of this talk, Publishing in the Age of Globalization. Nice, generic, straightforward. We're going to get way away from that. Why I like coming to Canada. This is the favorite headline of all the articles. We've published 5,600 articles in 6 years. My favorite headline ever. Destroy Amazon, courtesy of Kobo in Japan. That shows the ambition that an organization born and bred here in Canada, in Toronto, in a country that is relatively modest in size and scope compared to its neighbor, the scope of ambition that can be employed. Everybody should have this kind of confidence, even if it doesn't always work, because Amazon is a very difficult person to challenge. Witness, the French. The French try to pass an anti-Amazon law. I'm getting Amazon out of the way quick so we can go beyond them. When France last year tried to pass an anti-Amazon law, they did in fact, which basically said that Amazon cannot offer both free shipping and discounted books. Amazon said, wow, this really sucks. Okay, we won't offer free shipping. We'll offer shipping for 1 euro cent. Sometimes legislating, sometimes big ideas to get around these big issues and these big companies do not work, even when they are legislated. The reason I bring this up initially is because you can look at the smaller projects that are being done by startups around the world and hopefully find some inspiration. To look at another big market, and finally, hopefully one of the last times I'll mention Amazon in this talk. If you look at Germany, Germany is technically the second or third largest book market in the world. In the context of BookNet, of ebooks and digitization, ebooks are still less than 10% of the overall market in Germany. How is that connected with Amazon? It's interesting because what happened in Germany, if you're not familiar, is the 3 largest chain booksellers collaborated on their own ebook distribution platform and device called Tolino, launched in 2013. A lot of cynics said that there's no way that this is going to work. 3 years later, reports, which have been challenged by the publishers, suggest that Tolino, the homegrown German indigenous ebook platform, is already accounting for 40% of their local ebook market. Mind you, that's still a relatively modest sum. So again, these kind of efforts can combat what might be looked at as an unmovable force. I just want to get to that point. Now, I'm going to sum up the global bookscape, the global e-bookscape, the global print bookscape, in a little anecdote from my friend, the publisher of Braglione in France. Braglione is a publisher you may or may not be familiar with. They started off as a science fiction and fantasy and speculative fiction publisher in the 70s, back when it was a respectable intellectual practice in France to talk about the future. Then it became a rather disrespectful practice. Braglione sold a lot of books, but was never respected by the publishers in the center of the city, which is a very aristocratic and a very closed-off type of publishing society. In the last few years, Braglione got into ebooks very heavily, with romance, with erotica, with mysteries. But mostly they're making a lot of money selling erotica these days. No surprise. And he says to me, Edward, I will explain the book world to you a very simple way. He goes, I will use the analogy of French women and sex, okay? He goes, everybody thinks the ebooks are going to change the world. They're going to blow their mind. It is so different, just the same way they look at the way French women have sex. He goes, all of these men from around the world, they come to Paris, look at our women, they want to sleep with them. He goes, I tell you something. I spend all day sitting around the table talking with my women editors about sex, and I tell you something, they fuck the same way as everybody else. And in a sense, this is what the publishing world is like. They publish the same way as everybody else. Books are books, readers are readers, and connecting them is your job. So, if you break down what is happening in the book world, it's quite simple. It tends to be technology versus tradition. There seemed to be an opposition going on. But again, we're starting to see these two meld. I like to describe what has happened in the book world as an episode of The Twilight Zone. Are you familiar with this episode? Does anybody recognize it? A very famous one it's called Time Enough at Last. And the principle is simple. A man works in a bank, has nothing to do but read. So every time he has a break, he goes into the vault and reads his books. Well, one day he goes into the vault, comes out, and there's been a nuclear apocalypse. The world has ended. He's in love because now all he can do is sit around and read his books without being disturbed. Unfortunately, at one point he leans over in the episode, his glasses fall off his face, and they get smashed. And in a way that this is a good analogy for, I think, the way people felt about what's happening with digital. But we realized the world really hasn't ended. If this man had been working or using a library of books that were based on ebooks, like the Bexar County Library in San Antonio, Texas, which is an all-digital library that has been set up exclusively to serve the poor of the community and give them access to books, there would have been no despair. The digital world and the print world can cohabitate, depending on the circumstance. You wouldn't think of San Antonio, Texas as a really high-tech place. You wouldn't think of an immigrant community of Spanish-speaking Mexican Americans as a strong audience for a digital-only library. This has proven to be a very successful endeavor. Again, print and digital coexist. The Folio Society, which again you may know from the UK, has established themselves as a very, very strong and viable business for nearly 50 years, printing high-end exclusive reprints of classic books using very expensive illustrators. They are a going concern. They're expanding from the UK into overseas markets, into the United States, to Canada, with their print product in bookstores. It has taken them 5 decades to get there, but they're now doing it. Why? Because they can make money at it. This gentleman, no, this is not Alana Wilcox down at Coach House. She's much more attractive than that. This gentleman has his own printing machine, just like they do. What he's doing translations and his own pamphlet translated editions of very difficult French and Austrian philosophical texts, selling them exclusively online out of his office in Minnesota. These kind of things can continue to happen. When you look at the global bookscape, you have 2 different types of sales, intranational and international. By and large, you will find that the majority of business is done intranationally. And what I mean by that is the business that Canada does with the United States, the business Germany does with Austria, the business France does with Spain, and vice versa. The geographic groupings that tend to be most successful tend to be close in proximity and culturally, they have cultural affinities with one another. The idea that globalization is merely the idea of Brazilians exporting their books to the United Arab Emirates is by and large not borne out or has been viable. Likewise, you don't tend to see a lot of Australian books necessarily doing well in Mexico. It's not to say the opportunity does not exist, but let's be realistic about it. The cultural differences are too vast, the geography is too broad, even in the digital landscape, for that to become much of a viable market. But many think that when the stakes are as low as they are sometimes in publishing, financially, that it may be worth your effort. This is an individual decision based for yourself. All right, I'm going to put this in the context a little bit of the United States. Canada has a population, and specifically in Toronto, that's extremely multicultural, extremely diverse. In the US, we have a population of 330 million. I live in Texas, a place that you would assume is kind of a desert filled with cowboys who drawl and drink oil for breakfast. Not entirely true. But to give you an example of the interaction with the book world with this kind of population, My population in Texas is about half Mexican, or half of a derivation of South American, Spanish-speaking. Down on the border with Mexico, in a place called McAllen, Texas, has been built the largest single library institution in the United States. It's a public library. Not only does it offer, it's also built on the grounds of an old Walmart, if you want to get a sense of the scale, okay? This is on the border. It also happens to be in the town that houses the most highly profitable mall in the entire region of North America, largely because Mexicans are coming over the border to buy books, or buy goods and books. They also come over the border to read. What's interesting is that this library in McAllen, Texas, which holds over, I think it's 350,000 volumes, or it's 350,000 square feet, forgive my lack of specificity, also houses not only books in English, they offer them as many books in Spanish, but also in French. And it's kind of a curiosity to see this linguistic amplification in a library in southern Texas on the border with Mexico that's serving a population that is as much foreign as it is local. This is the kind of mixtures that you're starting to see happening in different places. America famously has this issue with foreign cultures that says we only translate 3% of our books. This number, I will posit, is false. Part of the reason that we can see that it's a little bit false is this is the vast range of titles that you're talking about. French, you're talking about some 16,000 titles translated out of French into English in the United States last year. This kind of audience, this kind of engagement, I think is gendering new types of publishing projects. When you can publish a Polish translation in the United States, if either print or digitally, and manage to sell it, the opportunities are truly, I think, ultimately endless. All right, now I also want to talk internationally a little bit. Not only is the linguistic opportunity in the United States viable, and I would assume in many ways it's the same opportunity available in Canada, you're starting to see this kind of cross-pollination of translated and linguistic commerce, if you will, happening in places like Germany. Germany's ePubli, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Holtzbrinck, is their self-publishing arm. Now, Holtzbrinck established this company more than 5 years ago. They're not based at Holtzbrinck's headquarters. They're based in Berlin, where it's considered a little bit more of a hipper atmosphere. But what they are trying to do is they are expanding from Germany, and they've expanded into the UK. Okay? You're seeing a German self-publishing company move across Europe to establish itself in a whole nother language and cater to this audience. But what's more, ePubli has not trimmed its ambitions. What they're suggesting now is that English language writers publish their books, self-publish their books in Germany. Now, does that make sense on the surface? No, but there are a lot of Germans who read English, and they have proven time and time again that you can sell a quantity of books to this audience. Now, if you're an individual self-published writer, this may make sense. Several hundred sales, several thousand sales, 10,000 sales is a significant number. But I'm also going to bet that for any one of you in this room, those kind of numbers are not unappealing. Another thing that you're seeing is you're seeing some innovation in these kind of spaces. This is, again, another ePubli published product. This gentleman has taken Minecraft as his inspiration for writing novels. And what he has been able to do is he's been able to leverage the audience of Minecraft fans, largely through walkthrough videos on YouTube, to actually purchase his books. So he took an existing audience of video game users, translated them into readers in no small amount. He's sold, I believe he said that the first time he posted any kind of walkthrough video, he sold 800 titles, but that was within the first hour. It's grown exponentially since then. This is a very, very successful enterprise, and it's a kind of curiosity. He's also translated these Minecraft books from German into English, Spanish, and I believe French. So he's, again, that kind of audience. Minecraft sort of spans the globe, and he's, as an author, being able to take advantage of this, also because of the ease of the digital distribution platform ePubli has offered him. We've seen the transformation of publishing from an analog world to a digital one. And just to quantify that a little bit, when information has been studied, it was from the book Big Data, which came out several years ago, when they looked at quantifying information in 2000, the year 2000, at the turn of the millennium, 75% of information was still analog, 25% was digital. And as of 2003, 2% was analog, 98% was digital. That was 2003, or 2013. I'm going to bet that that number is even smaller at this point of analog information. So we are, to belabor a point, living in a digital world. It went from this to this. It's been a big bang. And how do you deal with this large, vast, endless ocean of digital information? Well, you need to look at ways of parsing the data. And as you all know, there are a lot of companies that are offering this service. As a journalist, one of the most interesting ones to come to my attention recently is Trajectory. Has anybody in the room heard of Trajectory or had meetings with Trajectory? Trajectory, if you're familiar with another company called BookLamp, which was established about 5 or 6 years ago. BookLamp was a company that offered an idea of parsing how the scenes in a book were constructed. They would break down characters, the amount of times a character was mentioned, the amount of times a theme was mentioned. BookLamp, the model was so successful, they were acquired by Apple last year. Trajectory, similar type of idea, but they can actually track not only, the appearance of the characters, word usage, they also are offering you an idea of the sentiment of a book. They will take the words such as, love or joy, hate or war, and they will try to track the sentiment of a book and offer that information back to you in a graph. And then they can, of course, cross-reference that when the book is digital with other tracking information to tell you, well, at what point does a reader stop reading a book? Was it when the sentiment turned very negative or turned very dark? Was it when there was the 5th or 6th or 8th character introduced into the narrative? Actually, this is one of the points that they make, is that too many characters muddle a narrative, people tend to abandon books. But this offers publishers an awful lot of insight, not only into who's reading it, at what time of the day, when they pick, when they open their app and how far they get into a book, but literally the construction of the story and the impact of the story on the reader and their feeling towards that. This is a very interesting company to watch. These guys are based in Boston. They are working with, among other publishers, Tencent Literature in China. There was just an announcement 2 days ago. Tencent has 820 million users. It's going to be very interesting to watch what happens with that. I'm going to refer back to Tencent a little bit later today. But it's not just the Americans who are looking at doing this information. In Spain, again, this kind of issue is very important across the globe. The Spanish startup Mi Libretto, they are offering social analytics tools. But again, they're a Spanish startup. They're offering social analytics tools that span the globe. Twitter has not got a specific nationality. Facebook, if it was a nation, would be the largest on Earth. So again, these kind of startups can offer you services that may be useful to you, but they also may be a little bit more cost effective. They may be more aligned with your agenda. It's important to cast a wide net. I want to look at a couple things. I'm going to go through a bunch of little startups around the world that I just personally think are interesting. Total Books. Anybody here heard of Total Books? It's an Israeli startup, and they've been around. Again, when you say the word startup, I always wonder when people, I always joke, at what point is a company not a startup? And then I say that's when they stop needing to ask other people for money. So pretty much everybody's going to be a startup these days. But Total Books in Israel, they have a model, a digital publishing model, in which you can download any book in their catalog for free. And they're dealing with some rather significant publishers, Workman in the United States, Other Press, Gibbs Smith, Berlitz, O'Reilly. You have the app, you download as much as you want for free. And you only pay for what you read. So they are taking that tracking information and not only looking at how far you've read, but you're going to be charged only for what you read. So they've literally flipped that quantifiable data from reading into a business model. We're going to see if it works. Pigeonhole is another company. Pigeonhole is a London-based company that is offering subscriptions, but they're offering them only for serialized ebooks. Not such a radical transformation. There are a lot of companies that offer serialized ebooks. There are a lot of companies that offer serialized ebooks for free. I believe Rooster is one of the more prominent ones these days. But you're seeing people try. And again, what these guys are doing is they're saying, well, we can offer subscriptions for original content for serialization. What's interesting about this, though, is this is a couple of Africans from Nigeria who went to London and started this company. And they are marketing it across the world. It's always about these cross-cultural connections, at least in my vision of publishing. So simply put, disruption is international. And in Asia, again, we're going to talk a little bit about Tencent. If anybody's familiar with Alibaba, has anybody heard of Alibaba? I mean, at this point, we must have, right? They are moving now into our hemisphere. 11 Main is their kind of testing site. Alibaba is essentially what they say is it's a beautiful interface for delivering goods on the top of a giant logistics company. And they are about to challenge our friends, Amazon. In Europe, I've mentioned ePubli. Going forward, in the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about BookMate, Pentium, and some of these other companies, Paperwhite, Snappify. Essentially, if I was again to summarize things, it's the democratization of publishing that we've seen. Digitization isn't necessarily about low-cost ebooks, free ebooks, pirated ebooks. It's not even really about ebooks. This is really about the idea that publishing has now been democratized. Obviously, this is not new, but I think it bears repeating because it's not just in the developed markets like the United States. What this has meant now is you can have an Indian publisher who is competing directly with you in Canada for your audience, for your reader. We are now competing with everybody, professionals, amateurs, makers, and they can be based in Nigeria, Zambia, Colombia, India, Russia, the Ukraine, you name it. We've all heard about how successful Wattpad is, a local success story. But if you look at Wattpad's audience, and I'm sure that we've all heard Alan Lau talk about this, their growth is strongest in places like Vietnam, India, Indonesia. Can anybody name an Indonesian writer in this room? Okay. Pramadya Anantatur. He should have won the Nobel Prize, but he didn't. There's a few. But this is the kind of thing, when our growth is looking at markets, when our opportunities for growth is looking at markets in Vietnam, India, Indonesia, we need to know as a publishing community who those key figures are. It's a challenge. I'm deficient in it, you're deficient in it, we're all deficient in it. I didn't know who the Prime Minister of Canada was when I got here. It was a challenge. I'm not going to lie about it. Nah, it's all right, yeah. Harper, no. But the point being is that we all have these deficiencies. So as much as we feel like we have command of what our world is looking like, as soon as you step just over the transom, it starts to look completely different. But there are opportunities. I want to reinforce that fact that there are opportunities out there. Not only are there opportunities, there's opportunities for transformation. Anybody familiar with BookMate.ru? It's a Russian ebook subscription site. No? Nobody's heard of it? Okay. We've got a couple people. Does anybody know how BookMate.ru started? What they looked like 5 or 6 years ago? BookMate.ru started off as a site that encouraged you to send them copies of your books, which they would then scan and then post up online for free. Or if you wanted to, you could scan your own books and post them up online for free, and they would distribute them to the world. BookMate.ru was essentially a piracy site based out of Russia. And they offered then your pirated books to other people for, 5, 10 rubles a month. But BookMate.ru in 5 years has transformed itself through investment, through some oligarchs have invested, some London investors have invested, into a company that is now becoming one of the more prominent ebook subscription sites in developing markets. And they will tell you, as based on this video that we shot last year, they exist now to beat piracy. So what they did is they flipped their model. They were working in this space, but then they realized, well, if we can offer a legitimate subscription service in markets like Albania or Turkey or Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or Russia or Georgia, that we can beat the pirates at their own game by offering a low-cost product. I know Cory Doctorow here in the room has a lot to say about piracy and DRM, but this is just one perspective from one company that has seen its approach and plays to that. It says we can defeat piracy based on our model. Alas, Russia is having a very, very difficult year. So it's very important for BookMate to go beyond their borders. This is part of the pressure. They realized that they had not only a need to flip their business model on an ethical basis, they had a need to flip their business model on a financial basis. Sorry, I just think this is a funny headline. Russian publishing is no depressing Siberia. Just slipped in there. I want to talk, I'm going to go a little bit further now and talk again about another startup that I find very interesting, which is Pentium. Pentium is a Spanish-based crowdfunding platform for publishing. Not such an innovative idea, but what they have been able to do is they tell investors, as they call them in the books, if you back a book, you then share in the profit of the book. Half the money invested in a book by the backers on the crowdsourcing site will be returned to those people who have invested in it. What this has done is this helps leverage the audience into marketing activities. If you've invested in a book, you're going to also want to become a proponent of that book. You're going to tweet about it. You're going to put it on Facebook. You're going to send missives to your friends by email to buy this book because you then will profit from it. It turns essentially the reader into, in a form, a publisher, or at least a marketer for the book. And not only that, Pentium, which is a rather small startup out of Spain, has been able to entice some other very important people into working with their model. Paulo Coelho. Coelho is working under a slightly different model. They're working with their subsidiary Lantia, which is a POD distribution platform in Spain, run by Pentium. I know this is an awful lot of information, but I only have 40 minutes, so I just want to throw it out there and then we'll deal with it afterwards. But the fact is, Coelho, one of the best-selling, if not the best-selling living author on the planet, is willing to take a chance with some of his work with a small Spanish startup that is showing innovation, showing forward thinking, and also, in this case, hoping to return some of the profits back to his readers. That's a very different model, the idea of returning back some of the money to the readers. When you're looking at the global publishing scene, I think there's a couple ways to do it. And I think the more simplified it is, sometimes the easier it is to grasp. One way to look at it is the North versus the South, okay? We're in the developed North, the northern hemisphere of the planet. We have very robust infrastructure, we have high education, high literacy. But I want to point out that we are very fortunate. I think, again, ethics is, I think, a very important part of our business. What you're looking at on the top left is a library in Cambodia. Okay, that boat. That is the library system in Cambodia. There's 2 of those boats, okay? And you compare that down to the United Arab Emirates, which is on the far right. And that's just a terrible photograph of that library, because that library, which is being rebuilt in Abu Dhabi, is literally something out of the space age. It's unbelievable. So we live in a very bifurcated world. But that doesn't mean that you aren't having interesting things happen in the global South. Africa can be a very, very strong and interesting example of a place. Burma, another example of a place that you might think that there is no publishing or no ebooks. You would be wrong. Post-censorship, the obstacles to get into the publishing business, not only politically, but financially, have been lowered to such a degree that you have Burmese publishers now who are working in the Burmese language and working with ebooks. To me, I just think it's interesting, but also slightly astonishing. When I talked about African publishing, Nigeria's Ankara Press, which is a digital imprint of Cassava Republic, which is one of the larger Nigerian publishers. And this is a company that said, okay, what we're going to do is we are going to take existing genres from around the world, and we're going to produce our own imprints and see how they work. They looked at the romance imprint and said, well, a lot of Nigerians have cell phones, so we're going to publish digital originals in romance category. Not only what they did is they did that, but around Valentine's Day this year, they put together an original anthology, gave it away for free around the globe, and what they did is they ultimately tapped into the Nigerian diaspora, which is enormous. Nigeria has a population of over 200 million people, and it has a tremendous diaspora around the world. they were able to not only, by giving away this romance anthology for free, they were able to tap into the audience, but let them know that they frankly existed. Because, you know, a Nigerian who's living in London or a Nigerian who's living in New York doesn't necessarily want to read a romance novel about a publishing assistant, you know, in Brooklyn looking for love in Manhattan. They can't really relate to that. And this is very often the case. This is where the diaspora publishing comes in to be a very important part of what we do. Further south, you have just as much innovation happening in the other spaces other than trade, in education in particular in Latin America and Mexico. In Mexico, you have a couple different examples of publishers who are doing just very, very interesting work. Menuvo is a very interesting company, and one that I would encourage you to look at. And what they have done is they've actually created an ebook, library ebook platform for kids, a NABOX. But a NABOX isn't just a distribution platform. It's not something you log onto. It's a physical box. You order it, they ship it to you as a library, it pops up, it has internet access, it has screens, it has seating. It's a fully self-contained solution. And why is that important? Because when you're in a smaller city in Mexico, far away from the capital, where internet service is intermittent and there's an awful lot of poverty, this can relieve a lot of those kind of stresses. It's a self-contained solution. So again, not something you might necessarily need here in Toronto, but somewhere else in Canada, further north, perhaps. Again, you have the same thing happening further south in Latin America. Educatablet is a K-12 content provider. And what they do is, again, they're producing a child-friendly, school-friendly tablet that comes preloaded with a variety of textbooks. And it's made to be durable, it's made to be cost-effective. And again, when you're looking at Latin and South America, you don't have necessarily the most robust infrastructure. People are being creative with their solutions. The other way of looking at the world is West versus East. We, of course, are in the West. But where does the largest percentage of people in the world reside? In this circle. In that circle is more than 60% of the world's population. What kind of an opportunity does that represent for publishers? I referred earlier to China's Tencent. Now, Tencent literature, Tencent is a company that owns WeChat and QQ. Is anybody familiar with these apps or this service? Okay. I referred to the amount of users that they have active. 820 million daily users. And they have an ebook offering. 200,000 books, 650 million daily users for books. It's tremendous, tremendous opportunity. But what they're doing is they purchased recently Shanda Cloudery, which was the largest, what they would call an online writing platform, if you will, okay? Online writing platform is a nice way of saying a self-publishing platform or a blogging platform. But Shanda brought with them several hundred million readers, several hundred million writers, and not only that, they brought with them name brand IP, name brand authors. Tencent was buying not only a user base when they bought Shanda Cloudery, which they paid $800 million for, they were buying IP. And one of the strategies you're seeing with the self-publishing companies I've referred to before, with some of the more digitally innovative companies that are crowdsourcing material, and I would hope the established traditional business, is this exploitation of existing IP into different products. Tencent has had a lot of success taking self-published fantasy novels and turning them into animations, turning them into TV shows, turning them into YouTube channels, and in the case of one of their authors, turning them into top-grossing movies. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Tiny Times series. There have been 3 of them. It's been dubbed the Sex and the City of China. And this came out of essentially this self-publishing platform. Take a look at it. It's quite, it's charming in its playfulness, the Tiny Times series. But again, those ambitions are not, it's scale, when you talk about scale, it's not just China, it's India. And India you have a company like India's Paper Trail, and what they're trying to do is they're taking STM publications, scientific, technical, and medical texts. And what they want to do is they want to create interactive research. They want to create a platform where you have a scientific, technical, medical text and allow interaction not only with doctors and institutions, but with patients who have questions. And they want to do this not only in India, but they want to do it globally. They take texts that are published in English, and they're making them available at a relatively low cost, which itself is kind of revolutionary for the STM space, which is a very, very high cost area. All right, so I've got a couple of trends. Going back to my theme of the fact that I didn't know who the Prime Minister of Canada is, can anybody tell me who the top-selling author in India is? Or Russia? Or Mexico? How does that feel? I mean, for me, now I'm not going to tell you, I can tell you at this moment who those people are. But if we want to talk about doing business internationally, we need to know for ourselves who are the biggest players. Can anybody tell me who the biggest online bookstore is in India? Flipkart. In Russia. Okay. When we want to talk about the global markets, we need to inform ourselves. Okay? We can't be content simply to just sit here. I know that, I hope that doesn't sound patronizing, but I find myself deficient in these areas. So I want to talk a little bit about trends. In Asia, just to give it another overview, we're starting to see tremendous rights deals for books. Places like India, you're starting to see rights deals that are hitting $1 million for a title. This does tend to be in the more fantasy, speculative fiction, YA, dystopian novel area. A deal was struck for $900,000 last year in India for a trilogy of YA novels based on Hindu gods, okay? Now that's a very simple, very simple template that could be rolled out, and you're seeing it happen across the country, where people, or across the world rather, where you're seeing mythologies being turned into YA dystopian novels. But this is garnering huge advances in places overseas. One of the big problems, though, facing the Asian market is that they have a stopgap with engaging with the West because of a lack of translators. So as much as people are interested, as much as I challenge people to know who the biggest selling author in China is, or the biggest selling author in the Hindi language is, even if they are interested in those books, it's very difficult to find competent translators because they tend to be very, very busy because there are so few of them. You have essentially a bottleneck. It's one of the issues to consider when working with Asia. In Europe, as I've mentioned, self-publishing is very much on the rise, despite a well-established publishing industry, as well as government support for authors, government support for writers. There is still this enormous boom, and it's only going to be getting bigger. Countries like France are finally coming along to self-publishing. Countries like Spain are finally coming along to self-publishing. Italy. These are large markets that have been somewhat resistant to this digital transformation up until this point. They're going to be coming along, but that's also going to offer you new writers and new markets. Politics is a continuing issue in Europe when it comes to books. We just saw legislation passed in Europe that said that an ebook should be taxed as a digital piece of content rather than as a book, which tends to command a lower tax bracket. I think that some of these things are going to be challenged in the courts. You're also seeing a lot more experimentation in Europe as people are trying to challenge the large Western players like Kobo and Apple and Amazon. Africa, we have a scene where we're seeing just more authors emerging. The voices are starting to be heard, they're being amplified. When I described Ankara Press out of Nigeria, being able to tap into the global Nigerian diaspora, that's an important step. That's Nigeria, but how many countries are there in Africa? 52 to 53, 54, depending on how you consider the political landscape at the moment. These are voices that have audiences that want to be heard. You're going to start hearing more and more coming out of this part of the world. Digital is slowly emerging. In South Africa, you have some interesting projects like Snaplify, which does magazines, instant digital magazines, Paperwrite, which a company some of you may have heard of, which what they do is they send digital files to copy shops around South Africa. Then the copy shop uses a printer and prints off a textbook and then photocopies it. And all the rights for that are wrapped into that digital file. It's already been pre-approved for replication. But digital has a challenge in Africa, which is intermittent electrical power. If you're living in a place where they're rolling blackouts, it's pretty damn hard to have an ebook business. And finally, in South America, simply South America has been resilient to a large extent through the global economic recession. When you talk to at least publishers in the United States and a lot of European publishers, this is where they are looking to grow their markets. Whether that's translating books into Spanish for the education market or selling rights. You have each of the countries has an individual market, and each of them needs to be catered to differently, and a lot of people are seeing growth because there is a rising middle class in Latin America, and the rising middle class is trying to educate itself and trying to advance itself through reading, through publishing, through books. All right, if I was going to make a few predictions, just for the hell of it, as a journalist, yeah, it's still Amazon versus the world. Sorry. They have got a megalomaniacal plan to take over the planet. But, as I pointed out, there are a lot of efforts being put forth that are showing resistance to that, and not the least of which is Tolino in Germany, not the least of which is what Kobo Rakuten has tried to do in Japan. It's not an inevitability. When people lament the rise and power of Amazon, much in the way I've heard some Canadian publishers lament the fact that they are beholden to how many orders Indigo makes for their books. All I want to do is point out that, you know, the Ottoman Empire in 1916 looked pretty damn unstoppable. Does anybody even remember the Ottoman Empire at this point? Empires come and go. One of the other things I think that we're going to start to see is some mass market, direct-to-consumer custom printing solutions. If there's one thing that you might take away from this whole thing that I say is I've seen now technology where somebody can order a book, and this is technology out of Sweden, that enables you to order the book in any trim size you want, whatever typeface you want, whatever binding you want, and have it delivered to you in 2 to 3 days. Completely customized. Now, what could a trade publisher do with that if they had that service available? Well, they could certainly get rid of Amazon. They could even go direct to consumer and forego going to Indigo. And not only that, I could order an entire run of my Penguin Classics with blue leather in a pocket edition. It would go great with my decor. And you know what? You can charge a hell of a lot of money for that too. It's quite an interesting idea, I think. I don't know if you're going to see it roll out in a mass market way over the next couple of years, but the technology exists, the opportunity exists. And this is always about opportunities. I think you're going to see some some lawsuits in Europe over fixed price laws, and I think that those are going to be raised by these large corporations like Amazon and Apple. Now this again is speculation as a journalist, but I wouldn't put it out of the question, and if those fixed price laws are challenged, that could be very disruptive. Because I think as these companies, as their growth shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, that they have the deep enough pockets to take legal action in a way that's unprecedented. And if they challenge these fixed price laws, that could potentially be very disruptive to the existing publishing infrastructure in places like Germany and France, where fixed price laws really basically support a lot of the book business. Same thing with taxation. And finally, this is a kind of quirky thing that you'll see come across. They're seeing more and more direct translations into foreign markets, but people are using localized names. There's a publisher out of Barcelona called Barcelona eBooks, and they translate their mystery novels into English and distribute them through Open Road. But one of the things that they've experimented with doing is literally changing the names of the characters to anglicize them. Because what they realized is that readers might not, respond to a very distinctive Catalan name in a mystery novel. But not only that, you're starting to see American publishers translate into German, and Mitch turns into France. People are localizing the names. They're starting to even localize the settings because the digital publishing, the digital editing platforms allow you to do this with relative ease. Find and change. Now, whether or not that this, speaks to the kind of quality of literature that this is being done to is a whole nother question. But it is being done. It may be a little bit mercenary as an attempt to trick readers, but it's happening. I've got 5 do's, from things that I've seen around the world, especially when talking outside of the United States. One of the things you might want to do is find common ground with other markets that are similar to yours. I mean, that's a real basic one. Seek unexploited niches relevant to Canada. Is there a Canadian diaspora? Maybe not so much, but the relevant unexploited niches are there. You just have to look for them. For many places around the world, licensing has been the key to expanding market and revenue. Not necessarily publishing more books. I mean, I always joke, people are like, they don't buy my books, and I'm like, publish better books. But for a lot of companies, it's exploiting IT. It's doing what Tencent in China has done, is taking its existing IP, rather, and looking at different ways of exploiting that through licensing. That has proven to be a model that is working for a lot of publishers who were previously struggling in different ways. Monetize your backlist in creative ways. Basically the same thing. And remember, it's a marathon, so relationships matter. And in publishing, you know, people come and go, but it's those pre-existing relationships that are really going to get you further and further and further, particularly in the international marketplace. Face-to-face works a hell of a lot better than email. So, as we all know, places like the London Book Fair, the Frankfurt Book Fair, are very, very important and key to getting business done, even when you work in digital. There's 5 don'ts. Don't overvalue your copyright because tastes change. So you might have a piece of your backlist that may or may not work in the future. Just like if you're working in the digital sphere, we've all seen apps come and go. You know, in China, for example, a couple years ago, Baidu was a major platform, but everybody has moved over to WeChat. In the United States, we're on Facebook and Twitter at the moment. Pinterest came along. We don't know what's coming along next. This kind of notion that times will change is very important to keep in mind. Believe all your data, but first consider the source, okay? Don't over-engineer. Don't abandon good businesses because they will continue to work. If what you do is publish poetry and it sells and you're happy doing it, keep doing it. If what you do is develop apps with flying pigs and they sell and you're happy, keep doing it. Don't always chase the newest, latest thing. And finally, since I'm here in Canada, just don't undervalue brand Canada, the Canlit brand. I know you all can be very modest and very humble and in a very quiet kind of way, but it has strength and it has viability. One of the things I love about walking into an Indigo is there's an entire bookstore of books in a language that I read in a culture that I have some familiarity with that I've never seen before, and I still have no idea why. So just don't undervalue it. Finally, I just want to leave you with one point. I've described a lot of whats. I've thrown a lot of information out there. I've tried to, give you a couple little tidbits that might be of curiosity or interest to you. One of the things that I constantly hear at these publishing conferences is what? What can I do to quantify this? What can I do to make money? Well, finally, the question is not that, it's why. Why am I doing this? What gets me going every day? Why should I read this? Why should I publish this? Why should I write this? And for publishers, you guys help answer the why. That's up to you. That's really what the job of publishing is. I've run too long, so I'm going to say goodbye and thank you.